beautiful, spooky weirdos, and welcome to my channel, a home for the odd, obscure, and intriguing. A channel where we like to ask the question, people, do they know things? What do they know? Let's find out. My name is KP, and I am a human between the ages of Hassan Piker and Trisha Paytas. My birthday is Juneteenth, and since it's my first day here, I thought that I should probably start by telling the class some interesting facts about myself. So here goes. I was born with hair and teeth. Yes, teeth. They are called natal molars, and if you want to learn more about them, you can Google it. I am double jointed in my elbows, and I get a really sick sense of joy watching people figure that out for the first time because the reactions are always just so good. I love crafting, cryptozoology, and all manner of weird shit. I enjoy documentaries, stand-up comedy, horror movies, and sci-fi films. I am married, and my partner and I just celebrated 8 years together. I have known most of my best friends since the time that I was in elementary or middle school, and at any given time, there's a 70% chance that the lyrics to WAP are running through my head. I like to fancy myself something of a reservoir of the random, a broker in the bazaar, and a connoisseur of the creepy, curious, and cryptid. And just in general, I really love the odd, obscure, niche, and fascinating. I also really love sharing the things I find fascinating with others. I have a master's in social work in the area of children, youth, and families with a focus on neurodevelopmental disabilities. I, myself, am a person living with disabilities in the form of chronic illness and mental illness, although I dislike the term mental illness because it always makes me feel like my brain has a fever and it needs more and less blankets. I also prefer to call my depression melancholia because it sounds more like sparkling depression than anything else.
Big deal. Look at me. Psychological damage up to here.
That's part of the reason I became a social worker in the first place, to help me address my own things and to help others like me. I just wanted to be the kind of adult that I needed as a kid. And I just like to think of myself as having a really beautiful, broken brain. These are likely subjects that I'll touch more on in later videos, but for now, the reason that I bring them up is to, one, explain that if you see my face doing anything weird, I can't help it. I can't help my face.
It's my face. It's my face.
Oh, hey, Travis, am I doing your face? Because God forbid I do your face because it's such a good face.
And two, to explain where my fascination in today's subject comes in. But before we really get started, I want to share my vision for this channel since we're just now getting acquainted. Hopefully I've learned how to bookmark, so if this isn't something that you're interested in sticking around for, then you can jump to the main video. But please like and subscribe before you go, thank you! For those of you staying, I just want to tell you that this channel is a pure passion project for me, born of my love for all things weird, obscure, fascinating, and niche. I'm often asked by friends and family for recommendations because of my approximate knowledge of many things.
I have approximate knowledge of many things.
At this point, my brain is just a repository of pop culture references and memes. So this channel was born from that skill of collecting random resources and knowledge in the hopes that I can turn them into long-form documentary-style videos that will introduce you to a topic I loved or found fascinating, then being able to send you off with recommendations so that you can keep going down that rabbit hole on your own. I figured if my brain isn't going to prune off this information, I might as well put it to good use. This video is likely to be a bit longer than most, partially because of this foreword, but also because it's going to be covering a bit of a broader topic. I wanted to start out with a bang, but I also really feel the need to do this topic justice. This is somewhat of a lofty goal, as this is my first YouTube video outside of a school project. I probably should have started smaller, but as Ron Swanson says,
never half-ass two things. Whole-ass one thing.
I'll never get better if I don't start somewhere. And you never know if you never try, and you never try if you never know, you know? I'm hoping this, like most things, is just about trial and error, and with practice I'll get better. Doing this is forcing me to grapple with a lot of general discomfort around recording myself and essentially talking to myself. It's forcing me to put myself out there, which is something I'm not used to. I tend to be a pretty private person who doesn't put themselves out there very often. And when I do, I tend to bring myself right back in because I second guess immediately. Even if I was proud of the work I had done, I struggle to let others see it because of the anxiety I feel at the thought of just being perceived by others, especially those on the internet. I'm also worried I'll be misunderstood or just truly step in it. If it wasn't for my friends and family, I would not have the courage to make this. They are my biggest supporters, and They help me to put myself out there even when I'm afraid of what others may think. And I know that most ideas on YouTube are inherently original and that most things have been done before, but that's kind of the reason I wanted to make this channel a reality, because there's always someone who said it or did it better. And I like being able to share the things that I found fascinating with others. I tend to go through phases where I get stuck on a specific topic, and the only thing I want to do is consume as much content and knowledge as I can find on it. If you're also someone who enjoys finding new topics to deep dive into, then this is the right channel for you, because it's my hope that the topics I introduce to you will pique your interest enough that you'll continue your journey into learning about them with the recommendations I leave. Of course, the recommendations are not going to be comprehensive, as I'm only going to be suggesting things that I've actually seen and liked myself. But that's the beauty of this. If I missed something that you liked, please leave a comment and tell me about it, and so others can learn about it as well. You can also suggest topics that you'd like me to cover in the future so I can gather recommendations for those. Eventually, I hope to incorporate streaming into all this. I'm currently playing Pokemon, so if you know a relatively inexpensive way to stream from my Switch, please comment that as well. Today's topic is part of a series I'm calling Refer a Friend. And while we're talking about referring friends, why don't you go hit that like and subscribe button and turn on that notification bell. And if I've piqued your interest by the end of this video, maybe consider referring this video to a friend. Because sharing is caring, and a friend in need is a friend indeed.
A friend with weed is better.
And if none of that sells you on subscribing, then consider this. If you're watching this around the time it was posted, then you could be getting in on this channel on the ground floor. That will give you future bragging rights of saying I was there from the beginning. So if nothing else, do it for the possible future clout. I have a lot of fun video ideas in the works and hope to add more series as we go along. I eventually hope to introduce you all to my friends and family who will be helping me with this channel and making appearances. They're likely the only people watching this right now, so to them I just want to say, I love you, bitch. I ain't ever gonna stop loving you, bitch. Thank you for everything. Thank you for all your support. Thank you for putting up with me and my late night text messages, asking for feedback and ideas. I absolutely love you. I also want to plug that my sister, the paragon of the paranormal, her majesty of mystery, queen of all things unseen, and mother of the moon children, well, she has a podcast. For enthusiasts of the strange and extraordinary comes Star Queen Paranormal. It's your source to discuss the everyday that makes you say, hey. If you are a fan of AM Coast to Coast, then this podcast will be right up your alley, and it can be found on most streaming platforms. She also wrote a book. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll have that linked below in the description, along with all the other sources I talk about today. I want to send a quick shout out and an apology to my parents. At the time I'm recording this, we just found out that my mom is cancer free. She's an absolute warrior, and if you've ever had someone you love battle cancer, then you know what a big deal hearing cancer free is. Many people don't get to have that outcome, and we're not out of the woods yet, but today she is cancer free, and all we can be thankful for is today. I also want to give a shout out to my dad. He is my hero. He is our family's rock. And this isn't just a win for her, it's a win for him as well, because he was right there by her side the entire time. It's really weird to say that my parents are some of my best friends, but they are, and I couldn't dream of making this video without at least shouting them out. I also want to give you guys an apology, because profanities will be used on this channel, and while I'll try to keep them to a minimum and cut out the excessive.
If I can't smoke and swear, I'm fucked.
A quick content warning, as many of the topics that are going to be covered on this channel are not going to be suitable for most audiences. I would slap a hard PG-13 rating on this channel, including today's video, which finds its roots in racism, ableism, and many other isms not otherwise mentioned. So viewer discretion is heavily advised. With all that being said, thank you for being here. Thank you for loving me. I hope you enjoy the video. And please comment any advice you might have for a new YouTuber like me. Leave your own recommendations and tell me an interesting fact about yourself. Now, let's talk weirdos. But let me just go put on something just a little bit more thematic. Well, that took me substantially longer than I was anticipating. So, hi, welcome back. Like I said, what did I say? Much better. Now, where were we? Oh yeah. Step right up, one and all, for the greatest show on earth. Step inside and see unusual shrunken heads from across the globe. Feast your eyes on a two-headed fetal pig in a jar. Or if the crowd's feeling a little adventurous, you might be brave enough to go in and see Big Chungus. Big Chungus? Can you assist me here, Big Chungus? Big Chungus? Come and meet the one and only Big Chungus! Come here, Chungus! Devourer of worlds! Lover of bitches! Primordial sack of havers! Gaze upon Big Chungus! He is a hefty boy! See the primordial sack on this thing! But for our main attraction, my good people, you're about to behold a sight so horrifying, so strange, so utterly monstrous, that I urge you who suffer from nervous disorders, weak hearts, or queasy stomachs, who experience nightmares, or any children under the age of 16, to forego witnessing this exhibit. There are two kinds of freaks in this world, ladies and gentlemen, those created by man and those created by God. This exhibit behind me is a living, breathing human being that once looked just like you or I. That was until, well, that's a story for another time. But you've been warned, my good folks. Look if you must. That was my best impression of a carnival barker, or a carnival talker, depending on who you ask. Barker was never an authentic carnival term. Carnies, the people that work at the carnival, call the person gathering a crowd a talker. There was an outside talker to attract the crowds, and then an inside talker or lecturer who would conduct the crowds through a 10-in-1 show, introducing the act and then building interest in the blow-off. At the end of a 10-in-1 show, called that because it was 10 shows in one, the crowd, sometimes just the men, were often offered an extra added attraction for an extra fee. Something you can pay to see if you have a strong enough stomach or perhaps a strong enough desire to see a lady you think might be naked, or you could blow it off and leave without seeing the extra feature. Since the inside talker was also usually a magician, he would do his brief magic act for the ladies and children while the gents paid a little extra to go behind the curtain and see the blow off. Always implied was that the good stuff was something that you hadn't paid for yet. Moreover, hurry, 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 the phrase you often hear chanted by the carnival barker in movies, is far less sophisticated than the real outside talker's intrinsically contrived appeals. Some authentic samples can still be heard online if you search for them. The term barking was in use in the mainstream culture in the 19th century to mean drawing a crowd by talking in a continual repetitive lines and phrases. Barking was also called a grind pitch by some professional talkers. Used primarily by vendors at stationary spots such as a vegetable stand or a doorway to a show, it's easy to see how the general public applied the term to the carnival talker. But these talkers were your first experience to the shows inside. They were meant to describe the acts that you might see in an over-exaggerated manner to get people in the doors, over-promising what the crowd would actually see. These still exist at state fairs all over the country, like the world's largest cow. You might expect to see a living cow, right? Well, no. It might be an unusually large bovine, but it will likely be stuffed and mounted for display, and the claim that it's the biggest is questionable at best. I actually paid 50 cents when I was in my teens to see the world's biggest rat. I was drawn in by this exhibit since it was obviously a live animal in the enclosure, and so of course I was skeptical, and I walked in and I went up to the cage and took note that the area was too dark to really see what was going on strategically. And I walked to the side of the barrier and I peered in as close as I could, and what I saw was not the world's biggest rat. Maybe one of the biggest rodents in the world, but certainly not a rat. It was a capybara. My point being that was the whole appeal of these shows. Whether what you'd see was real or fake, it really didn't matter once you were in the doors. That's why these shows work so well, and the advertising tactics used in them are still used today, albeit in different forms. Which brings us to the history. The history of the freak show is rooted in racism, the exploitation of the poor and disabled, and the othering of those from different cultures. It's fascinated humans for centuries, the odd, the obscure, the unknown. It feeds into this natural urge of ours to gaze upon things outside of the norm, to gawk at the unusual in the name of entertainment. Today, we're going to dive deep into the history of the freak show, talk some shit about PT and the Greatest Showman, and discuss some of the most famous performers. Then I want to finish this out with leaving you with some recommendations to keep this little rabbit hole going and explore for yourself the dark and fascinating history of freak shows. A freak show, also known as a creep show, is an exhibition of biological rarities referred to in popular culture as freaks of nature. Typical features would be physically unusual humans, such as those uncommonly small or large, those with intersex variations, those with extraordinary diseases and conditions, and others with performances expected to be shocking to viewers. Heavily tattooed or pierced people have sometimes been seen in freak shows, more common in modern times in sideshow acts, as if attention-getting physical performers such as the fire eater or the sword swallower. Since at least the medieval period, deformed people have often been treated as objects of interest and entertainment, and crowds have flocked to see them exhibited. An early modern example was the exhibition at the court of King Charles I of Lazarus and Jolens Baptista Colloredo, two conjoined brothers born in Genoa, Italy. While Lazarus appeared otherwise ordinary, the underdeveloped body of his brother dangled from his chest. When Lazarus was not exhibiting himself, he covered his brother with a cloak to avoid unnecessary attention. As well as exhibitions, freak shows were popular in taverns and fairgrounds where freaks were often combined with talent displays. For example, in the 18th century, Matthias Buchinger, born without arms or lower legs, entertained crowds with astonishing displays of magic and musical ability both in England and later Ireland. It was in the 19th century, both in the United States and Europe, where freak shows finally reached maturity as successful commercially run enterprises. During the 19th century and the early 20th century, freak shows were at the height of their popularity. The period of the 1840s through the 1940s saw the organized for-profit exhibition of people with physical, mental, or behavioral rarities. Although not all abnormalities were real, some being alleged, the exploitation for profit was seen as an accepted part of American culture. The attractiveness of freak shows led to the spread of the shows that were commonly seen at amusement parks, circuses, dime museums, and vaudeville. The amusement park industry flourished in the United States by the expanding middle class who benefited from short work weeks and larger incomes. There was also a shift in the American culture which influenced people to see leisure activities as necessary and a beneficial equivalent to working, thus leading to the popularity of the freak show. The showmen and promoters exhibited all types of freaks. People who appeared non-white or who had a disability were often exhibited as unknown races or cultures. These unknown races and disabled whites were advertised as being undiscovered humans to attract viewers. For example, those with microcephaly, a condition linked to intellectual disability and characterized by a very small pointed head and small overall stature, were considered or characterized as missing links, or as atavistic specimens of an extinct race. Hypopituitary dwarfs, who tend to be well proportioned, were advertised as lofty. Achondroplastic dwarfs, whose head and limbs tend to be out of proportion to their trunks, were characterized as exotic mode. The exotic mode of presentation was often used to exhibit so-called tribal people. The exhibit background might include papier-mâché boulders and faux tropical plants in order to exoticize and enfreak the human. Within this hyperbolized environment, the inferiority and otherness of the person within the exhibit is emphasized. Those who were armless, legless, or limbless were also characterized in the exotic mode as animal people, such as the snake man or the seal man. There were 4 ways these shows were produced and marketed. The first was the oral spiel or lecture. This featured a showman or professor who managed the presentation of the people or freaks. The second was a printed advertisement, usually using long pamphlets and broadside or newspaper advertisements of the freak show. The third step included costuming, choreography, performance, and space used to display the show, designed to emphasize the things that were considered abnormal about each performer. The final stage was a collectible drawing or photograph that portrayed the group of freaks on stage for viewers to take home. The collectible printed souvenirs were accompanied by recordings of the showman's pitch, the lecturer's yarn, and the professor's exaggerated accounts of what was witnessed at the show. Exhibits were authenticated by doctors who used medical terms that many could not comprehend, but which added an air of authenticity to the whole proceeding. Freak show culture normalized a specific way of thinking about gender, race, sexual aberrance, ethnicity, and disability. And unfortunately, I can't talk about freak shows without having to talk about P.T. bitch-ass Barnum. Master at the art of a fuckery. For all of you Our Flags Mean Death fans, listen, I love The Greatest Showman, okay? This is me. Absolute banger! So good! Watch out, 'cause here I come! and I'm marching out to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me. It's a banger, okay? But the true history of P.T. is far darker than the rosy-colored interpretation that Disney gave us. Legendary P.T. Barnum earned many nicknames during his 80 years. He was variously the man who invented show business, the Shakespeare of advertising, the Prince of Humbug, and the world's greatest fraudster. Barnum's career trafficked in curiosities, which he served up to a public hungry for such entertainment, regardless of how factual or ethical such displays were. His legacy in show business stretched from the American Museum to P.T. Barnum's Grand Traveling Museum, Menagerie, Caravan, and Hippodrome, the predecessor of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, near the end of his life. Each were full of bigger-than-life ideas, marketed to an audience interested in mass and often crass entertainment. He once exhibited the skeleton of a mermaid, which was actually a monkey sewn onto a fish carcass, and claimed to have President Washington's 160-year-old nanny in his ensemble, and routinely exploited black people, the mentally and physically disabled and deformed, including conjoined twins and a child with dwarfism, in the name of profit. Towards the end of his life, and aware his health was failing, Barnum, who was from Connecticut, decided that he wanted to read his own obituary in print before he died. The New York Sun obliged, running its front page, "Great and Only Barnum" tribute weeks before he actually passed away in 1891, which occurred following a stroke on stage. Where else? The biggest failures in The Greatest Showman were neglecting to mention Barnum's endless failed business ventures, his obscenely hasty second marriage after his wife's death to a girl 40 years his junior, and his horrific mistreatment of the animal exhibits. They also left out his cynical and relentlessly commercial manipulation of hundreds of America's vulnerable, abused misfits as money-making opportunities in his freak shows. In The Greatest Showman, the emphasis is firmly on Barnum's so-called empowering of these individuals rather than the exploitation. And why no mention of Joyce Heth, the 80-year-old black slave whom Barnum bought, for £1,000 in 1835, who was rebranded as George Washington's 160-year-old nanny and became a traveling exhibit. She's been airbrushed out completely. There is also no mention in the film of black conjoined twins Millie Christine, or black brothers Eco and Iko, all of whom had been kidnapped from their parents as children for their freak show value and later acquired by Barnum, or the dreadlocked black males who were displayed in cages as wild men, which is a shame because they all helped him turn into a multi-millionaire and the most widely known American that ever lived. We'll discuss some of his performers in a little bit, but before we talk about that, let's jump back a bit and touch on his history. Phineas Taylor Barnum was born in Bethel, Connecticut, 70 miles from New York in 1810. His father was a struggling tailor and a shopkeeper who worked hard for a little return. From the start, young Phineas wanted to make a lot of money, fast. Over the years, he tried and failed at endless schemes, such as grocery stores, a lottery, a weekly newspaper, a fire extinguisher that could not put out a fire, and a cargo ship that never took on cargo. Then, in 1835, after moving to New York City with his wife Charity, he came across Joyce Heth. It was a eureka moment when he recognized the appeal to the American public of the unusual, the unexplained, the grotesque, the maimed, the disabled, the deformed, and the downright fake. "Nobody ever lost a dollar by underestimating the taste of the American public," he once famously said. He had found his calling and proved to be a genius at coming up with unbelievable cons and outrageous tricks. He instinctively knew better than anyone how to give audiences the mix of glitz, craziness, and ghoulishness they craved. Some of his scams were fun and harmless, like that genuine mermaid skeleton, ostensibly caught by sailors near Fiji. Others caused gasps of disbelief and accusations of abuse and racism, even back then. At the American Museum, more than 4,000 visitors poured per day to browse some 850,000 interesting curiosities at the price of 25 cents a trip. The fake and the real commingled in the space, with imported exotic live animals mixing alongside hoaxes like the so-called Fiji mermaid, a preserved monkey head sewn onto a preserved tail of a fish. Most uncomfortably in the museum, Barnum continued to present freakishness in the form of living curiosities. One of the most popular displays featured a man billed as a creature found in the woods of Africa, supposed to be a mixture between the wild native African and the orangutan, a kind of monkey man. The offensive poster concluded, for want of a positive name, the creature was called, what is it? In truth, what is it was an African-American man named William Henry Johnson. Before coming to the show, he served as a cook for another businessman in Barnum's Connecticut hometown. Similar racial othering permeated the rest of Barnum's living curiosities, from the Aztec children, who were actually from El Salvador, to the real but exoticized Siamese twins, Chang and Eng. As Benjamin Reese, professor and chair of English at Emory University and author of The Showman and the Slave of Barnum, explained in an interview with Smithsonian.com that Barnum's legacy has become sort of a cultural touchstone. The story of his life that we choose to tell is in part the story that we choose to tell about the American culture, he says. We can choose to erase things or dance around touchy subjects and present a kind of feel-good story, or we can use it as an opportunity to look at a very complex and troubling history that culture has been grappling with for centuries. Today, Barnum and his career arguably serve as a Rorschach test for where we are and what kind of humbug tale we are willing to be sold. But if you can look clear-eyed at Barnum, an undeniable fact of his biography is his role in marketing racism to the masses. He had these new ways of making racism seem fun and for people to engage in activities that degraded a racially subjected person in ways that were intimate and funny and surprising and novel, says Reese. That's part of his legacy. That's part of what he left us. Just as he also left us some really great jokes and circus acts and this kind of charming, wisecracking American uncle reputation, this is equally a part of his legacy. Rather than exploring such dark notes, The Greatest Showman is more interested in spinning a pretty tale, a humbug if you will, of a magnitude that even Barnum himself would likely tip his hat to. But as the late historian Daniel Borstein put in his critical text, The Image, perhaps this revolutionary storytelling shouldn't be a surprise to those paying attention. Contrary to popular belief, as Borstein wrote, Barnum's great discovery was not how easy it is to deceive the public, but rather how much the public enjoyed being deceived. Whew! Well, I don't want to have to keep going at this pace and give myself more editing work. I'm going to have to do this in a part 2. It's just a little bit too much. It's just too much for me to edit, and I don't know what I'm doing very well, as you can tell from my changing audio and increasingly better sounding quality of audio, hopefully. Well, that is where I'm going to leave it for today. Leave a comment. Tell me what you've thought so far. Tell me how you felt about The Greatest Showman. Zendaya, I don't care what you do, girl. You could literally just sit in front of a screen eating peanut butter all day and I would be into it. I would be there for it. Girl, you can do anything. I would see it. But until next time, remember that it's chaos. So be kind.